I'm dealing with a difficult situation in my life right now. My mom and sister have been taking advantage of me for years, and now it's gotten to a point where I feel like I need to distance myself from them. However, I'm torn because cutting them off would leave them struggling financially, which I find hard to accept. I'm 38 years old, married with 2 kids, and have been living in Ohio for the past 6 years. Originally, I'm from Houston, and my upbringing was tough due to my parents' divorce. My dad accused my mom of infidelity, which led to their separation when I was 10 years old, and my sister was 5. It's unclear whether the accusation was true or not, as my mom never remarried. My dad supported my education but didn't provide for my sister, and my mom didn't contest it. This fueled the belief that my sister might not be my dad's biological daughter. My dad wasn't present for most of my childhood, only showing up occasionally to pay for my school fees and bring me gifts. When I reached high school, I reached out to my dad, and since then, he's been a significant part of my life. Despite my mom's resistance, he even attended my wedding. Over the years, I grew closer to my dad than to my mom. He visited Ohio a couple of times after I settled there, but sadly, his time was cut short when he was diagnosed with a terminal illness and passed away last year. My mom didn't approve of my bond with my dad and became distant from me. My dad named me as his heir. He remarried after divorcing my mom, but he didn't have any children from his second marriage. He always considered me his only daughter. Naturally, my mom and sister weren't happy about this because my dad favored me, and I inherited his $400,000 trust fund. But it's not just about the money. Throughout my childhood, my dad supported my education, which allowed me to attend better schools and colleges compared to my sister. This support started coming in when I was around 10, and by the time I was 12, my mom had little control over it. The education fees were paid directly to the school and college from the child support money. My mom did use some of the money for my sister in household expenses, but she made sure to keep me content so I wouldn't complain to anyone. Growing up, I wouldn't say my mom and sister were evil, but they definitely favored each other over me. I was smart both academically and streetwise, and I didn't let them walk all over me. Maybe that's why my mom never mistreated me. Nowadays, my main issue is the $400,000 inheritance from my dad. Ever since my mom and sister found out about it, they keep coming to me for money for various reasons. This isn't the first time they've asked for financial help. As I started earning more, their needs seem to have grown too. They don't make much money themselves. My mom works as a cashier and my sister in sales, but together, they don't earn half of what I do. Despite not being very emotionally close, I feel obligated to help them because they're family, and they've never been outright mean to me. A few months back, my mom called me, saying she wanted to renovate our old house. It's been falling apart since my dad left, crumbling walls, damaged ceilings, and faulty wiring. She explained that living there during storms was becoming unbearable. The condition of the house was getting worse, almost as if it might collapse any day. My mom hinted at needing money for renovations during a conversation, mentioning that she had visited the bank for a loan, but found the interest rates too high. It was clear what she wanted, but neither of us directly addressed it. After that talk, I started avoiding her calls, although she didn't usually call frequently. However, last month, she called me several times. When I finally answered, she admitted that it was becoming unsafe to live in the house during bad weather and straightforwardly asked me for $100,000, promising to pay it back in installments. I was taken aback and told her I couldn't lend that much. She then alluded to the inheritance money, which infuriated me, but I didn't want to discuss it further. Eventually, we settled on $50,000 as the maximum amount I could lend her, and she agreed. After agreeing to lend my mom $50,000, I began to regret my impulsive decision. I could have just ignored her request, but now that I'd committed, I didn't feel good about lending such a large sum. My husband suggested lending the money in installments and keeping an eye on the progress of the renovations before giving more. I informed my mom that I would be sending the money in installments. I decided to transfer the first $10,000 to my inactive Houston account and gave her access to it. When she questioned why I didn't transfer the money directly to her account, I made up some excuse, blaming it on my husband's suggestion. I'm not very hopeful that she'll return the money, but I'll wait and see how it goes. I can't quite pinpoint exactly how my mom and sister attempted to manipulate me for easy money. It's been 2 months since I started lending money to my mom for the house renovations. So far, I've given her $20,000, and that's where it stops. I always knew they were only nice to me because of my money, but I never expected them to lie to me so blatantly just to get more out of me. If they had been honest about their intentions, it wouldn't have hurt as much. Recently, I found out from one of my school friends that my sister is getting married. Interestingly, my friend's husband is a wedding planner, and my sister has been working with their agency to plan her extravagant wedding. I don't think my sister realized that I'm friends with them. This wedding is no small affair. They're calling it a grand event. What stings the most is that I wasn't even informed about it, let alone invited. I had imagined it to be a close, intimate affair, but my friend revealed that the guest list had around 100 people. It's disheartening not to be included in even the smallest part of my sister's big day. But what bothers me more is where she got the money to fund such an extravagant wedding. The venue is one of the best in town, with unlimited food, drinks, and top-notch decorations. It leaves me wondering how she managed to afford it all. I decided to check the bank account where I had been sending money for my mom's supposed renovation work. To my surprise, the account was empty. When I called my mom to ask about the progress of the renovations, she claimed that the work hadn't started yet, despite her hiring a renovation company. I couldn't stomach her lies any longer. Although I wasn't certain if they were actually using my money for her wedding, the thought disgusted me. It seemed hypocritical for them to splurge on her wedding while still taking money from me for house renovations. For a moment, I considered flying down to Houston to see for myself what was really going on, but I quickly realized it wouldn't be worth it. Instead, I reached out to my aunt, my father's sister, who lived nearby my mom's house. I asked her if she knew about my sister's wedding, and she confirmed that she did, that she hadn't been invited either. Considering my mom's strained relationship with my father's side of the family, this wasn't surprising. My aunt mentioned that my sister's wedding had become the talk of the neighborhood. It struck me how just a few years ago, their house was falling apart, and they struggled to make ends meet. Now, they suddenly had a brand new house and were throwing a lavish wedding. Feeling dizzy and disoriented, I processed the conflicting information. My mom claimed the house renovations hadn't begun. Yet my aunt said the house was gleaming with new paint. Then it hit me. About 6 months ago, my mom asked me for $20,000 for a knee transplant. Curious, I called her to inquire about the details, fabricating a story about a friend needing orthopedic information. Caught off guard, my mom stumbled over her words. Unable to provide any hospital or clinic details, she quickly made excuses and hung up, later turning off her phone and ignoring my attempts to contact her. Realization dawned on me. The money I gave her for the transplant was likely diverted to the house renovations, while the funds I continued to provide for the renovations were likely funding my sister's extravagant wedding. The shock deepened when I learned that my sister's engagement had been held at my own house, lavishly decorated with lilies and overflowing with wine. I felt utterly blindsided, living in ignorance while my family pretended to be financially struggling, all the while draining money from me. Fed up with their lies and manipulation, I decided to ghost them. I stopped sending money to the account and ignored all attempts at communication from my mom and sister. Even when my sister, who hadn't reached out to me in years, tried to contact me, I remained silent. I refused to be their scapegoat any longer. It doesn't matter that I earned more than them or that my father left me an inheritance while giving them nothing. Their attempts to leech off me with their deceitful tactics are unacceptable. I've made a vow to myself to sabotage my mom's princess's big day. I was proven right about my mom's behavior when she resorted to calling my husband after I ignored all their attempts at communication. Despite warning my husband not to engage with them, he caved when my mom called him. She started crying, claiming that I had abandoned them and that they desperately needed the money for the ongoing renovation work. My husband, to my dismay, blurted out the truth, exposing their deceitful actions. He told her that we knew about their plan to use my money for my sister's wedding under the guise of house renovations, as well as the falsehood regarding the knee transplant. I was infuriated by my husband's honesty, as I had hoped to make them suffer for their deception. To add insult to injury, my mom bombarded my phone with apologies and excuses. She claimed it was all a misunderstanding and that she had borrowed money from someone else for the house repairs, intending to repay them with my funds. It was just another attempt to deceive me. After numerous calls and messages from my mom, I finally agreed to speak with her on the condition that she told me the truth. Reluctantly, she admitted everything. She confessed that my sister wanted a lavish wedding, but they lacked the funds. So they devised a plan to extract money from me under the guise of house renovations. It was my sister's idea to use the renovation excuse to manipulate me into giving them money. They were aware that I hadn't visited Houston in years and had lost touch with people there, making it unlikely for me to know about the house renovations. When I confronted my mom about why she hadn't been honest and simply asked me for money directly for the wedding, she claimed my sister didn't want to accept a direct favor from me. It was a shocking revelation. I pointed out that I knew she used the money meant for the knee transplant to repair the house, and she fell silent. I told her I knew the whole truth, so there was no point in hiding it. She admitted that they hurriedly fabricated the knee transplant story because the house was in disrepair, and my sister's in-laws were planning to visit. They couldn't come up with a better emergency reason to ask for money, so they panicked and made up the story about the urgent knee transplant. While I remained composed during the call, inside, I was devastated. How could my own mother deceive me for her own benefit? I understood they had financial difficulties, but that didn't justify their manipulation and extortion of money from me by playing on my emotions. After hearing the truth, I hung up and cried for hours. It was the hardest I cried since my father passed away. That day, I missed him terribly. He was the only one who truly loved and cared for me. After 2 days, I received a voicemail from my mom, asking me to send the remaining amount for the wedding preparations now that I knew the truth. It disgusted me to my core. If she weren't my mother, I would have unleashed a torrent of abuse on her. How could she be so self-centered? There was no hint of remorse in her voice. All she cared about was money. They didn't even bother to invite me to the wedding, not even out of formality. When the truth finally came out, I felt overwhelmed with frustration. I couldn't bear their selfishness any longer. I promptly blocked both of them. I also warned my husband not to entertain their calls, and if he dared disobey me, he would find himself sleeping outside on the porch in the cold night. I meant every word of it. I've stayed in touch with my aunt, who informed me that the wedding is scheduled for next month. I didn't disclose the details about the money, but I know for sure that my mom and sister are struggling to put together the extravagant wedding they had dreamed of. And frankly, I think it serves them right. Despite standing firm on my decision, I continue to receive calls and voicemails from my mom and sister, persistently asking for the money. However, I remained resolute and didn't waver. On the day of the wedding, my mom's last voicemail expressed her disappointment in me, disowning me and forbidding me from calling her mom or visiting her ever again. Hearing those words shattered me, and I broke down in tears in front of my husband. Some might label me as evil or stubborn for ruining my sister's wedding, and my mom accused me of being arrogant and self-centered. But she never acknowledged her lies or deception. All this time, I helped them because I felt obligated to do so, considering them my family. But to them, I was merely a means to make money. On the wedding day, I received a call from my friend, whose husband was my sister's wedding planner. She informed me that the wedding might be canceled because they hadn't paid the remaining expenses. When I asked how much they had paid so far, she said $20,000. I remarked that $20,000 was sufficient for a decent wedding, but my sister had ordered top-notch decorations and food, and even the venue itself cost around $20,000. When asked if I was attending the wedding, I declined, citing other commitments. My friend understood that I wasn't particularly close to my mom and sister. To be honest, I couldn't shake off the feeling of guilt for ruining my sister's wedding. At one point, I even considered transferring the remaining amount to my friend and asking her to proceed with the wedding plans. But then I remembered my mother's hurtful voicemail disowning me. What was the point of going above and beyond for them when I ended up being disowned in the end? My actions might not have been ideal, but they were a reaction to their deceitful behavior. I decided to switch off my phone and spend the day out with my kids to distract myself from the turmoil. The next day, my friend called again, expressing her anger at my sister for bringing down her husband's reputation in the market. On the wedding day, my mom and sister had begged her husband, the wedding planner, to arrange something basic for the wedding and promised to pay an additional $10,000 later. Despite the advance payment of $20,000 covering most of the venue costs, the arrangements were criticized harshly by the guests and the groom's family. To make matters worse, my sister blamed everything on the wedding planner, shifting all the blame onto him. My friend's husband, being a good man, chose to remain silent and took the blame upon himself, allowing the wedding to proceed. Yet my family hadn't even paid the promised additional $10,000 yet. I felt deeply embarrassed hearing about my family's ordeal. While my friend assured me she wasn't blaming me, I couldn't help but feel ashamed of their actions. It was embarrassing to see them place all the blame on the wedding planner. My husband, however, offered a different perspective. He believed they got what they deserved and that I shouldn't worry too much about them. According to him, they brought this upon themselves by resorting to deceitful means to impress others. In hindsight, I realized my mother's disownment might have been a blessing in disguise. I no longer had to deal with their lies and manipulative tactics. It was time to move forward.